as we're going on to the client interview, right? I always like to joke, the basic questions: who, what, where, when, why, how, right? But oftentimes we forget this. And who, what, where, when, why, how. These are the basics of any communication, of any interview. But sometimes we're lost on the fact that the main purpose of any client interview is to build trust. Okay, something is going on in a client's life. I see we have a question. We have a question. I'll answer that now. So divisional instructions. So a lot of the judges, if you go onto their judicial webpage, it will have their instructions for how they like things to be handled. Quite often they have certain rules, or even within the local rules, the judges will have certain rules regarding the way they like their motions filed, the way, courtroom time starts, the way that they like their decorum. They may want AUSAs and the defense counsel to speak about certain topics prior to court, or make sure that you're extremely prepared. So there's a lot of different things that are in the divisional instructions, and I've always found that it's key to really get your insight into the judge, because you certainly don't want to show up to court, start talking about something, and then have a United States Federal District Court judge say, well, counselor, that's clearly against my judicial, or my divisional instructions. Did you bother to read that? And then already you're starting off on the wrong foot. And who is that going to hurt? Who could that potentially hurt? Right, your client. So all you have to do is just go on Google and search, depending on your jurisdiction, and most jurisdictions have that, and we found that to be very important, especially for newer practitioners. And that's a great question. Thank you for that. Going back to the client interview, right? The most important thing, I believe, is building trust. You have a client who is scared and nervous. They can be at many stages of the case or of an investigation, but regardless, some intervening life event has happened to bring them to your office. You must build trust. That is the number one thing you must do in any client interview. Okay, when you're meeting with clients, it's a very fluid situation, because yes, you have to build that trust. You have to get them to open up to you, but you need to find out at what stage in the case they're at. And in the federal system, the stages can be, there's more stages, and they can be more complex than state court. State court is usually, has the person been arrested or not? If they had, well, then that's easy. They've been arrested. And if they're out of jail and bonded out already, that's easy. They're in front of you. If they're still in jail, then you're most likely meeting with a family member. If they have not been arrested yet, then there's an investigation, right? But in the federal system, the investigation process is a lot more complicated in and of itself. You need to find out, right? Have they been questioned by law enforcement? Have they received a notice from the government that they're under investigation? The federal system is quite different than state. In fact, that quite often they'll actually send you a letter. Are they a target, or are they a suspect? There's a very big difference between those two. So, and the government will literally, not always, but quite often they'll send you a letter, which in state court, at least in South Florida, is unheard of, for them to just send you a letter saying, hey, we believe you've committed a crime, right? Or you're under investigation. So you really need to find that out, and quite often people don't really fully understand the process. So you have to dig deep with them, because we've had clients call us and come in and say, look, I received a phone call saying I was the victim of fraud, or the victim of a crime by an FBI agent, by the federal government. And when we peel it back, we find out that no, actually they could be a co-conspirator, they could be a target, they could be a suspect. So this client interview process is crucial, right? So we're talking about now who, right? So has the client been contacted by law enforcement, and which branch of the Department of Justice? There's the FBI, the DEA, ATF, right? Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Secret Service, and the IRS. You can go to justice.gov to look up the different branches and really find out more about what they do and what they specialize in. I remember being, very young, even back when I was a prosecutor before I left, I had no idea at that time that the Secret Service, also dealt with identity theft, right? I'm like, why would the Secret Service be on this case? It's not involving the president or a high-ranking member, a politician. And then I found out, oh no, they actually are very involved, with investigating identity theft and fraud cases. So you really need to get to know the players and really have the contact information at your disposal, because you always want to be prepared and be prepared, fully prepared before a situation happens. So before the client calls you, before the client and or their family come in to meet with you, you want to make sure that you have a list of all the contact information of the federal law enforcement in your area, so that way you can have that, you can discuss that with the client, and you're not scrambling to find that later. We believe that's very important, with making sure that you know who the players are. Secret Service, is a little more specialized, but FBI, right? The FBI has many different functions, and so quite often a client will say, well, I'm being investigated by the Fed, so it must be the FBI, right? But it could be the United States, Postal Service, right? It could be a Postal Service, federal inspector for the Postal Service if we're talking about mailing a package that has narcotics in it. And you got to ask those detailed questions to really get at the heart of it. So you never want to take what a client or potential client says 100% with a grain, or as 100% true. Not because they're being untruthful, but because they just don't understand and know how the whole system works. So they might say, well, yes, I got contacted by, the FBI, but it might be the DEA, it might be somebody else. And they're just putting, their spin on it because they don't fully understand. So never, ever, ever take what a client says to you as far as who contacted them and when and why as the gospel. You always want to ask those questions. And again, it's who, what, where, when, why, how. It's, just go back to the very basics, but go deep. You want to go deep with your client. Now we're talking, about how, right? When do they first become aware? Sometimes clients will get a call or a voicemail with, that's generic, but it says that there's an issue and they need to call, the federal law enforcement. Well, a lot of those sound like scams. So sometimes clients aren't able to differentiate most of the time between what's a scam and what's actually the truth. So you need to ask these questions and find out, have they had any calls? Did they ignore them? Did they not? Is that the reason they're here? Or were they engaged in any follow-up? Right? It could be, a target letter through a federal prosecutor. It could be, again, a federal law enforcement. Sometimes they do show up at your house. I know, that's usually the way they do it in state court. Federal court, there's many different ways, but they do that, in the federal system as well, where they could just show up unannounced. Obviously, it could be a search warrant or some other, might warrant your home, your business, a vehicle, or could even be a grand jury subpoena. Basically giving you, X amount of time to show up in front of the grand jury with documents. We've had situations where a client will show up to their bank to make a withdrawal, and the bank, they'll call the bank manager who says, I'm sorry, but we can't give you access to this. Some bank employees are a little more forthcoming with why, but we've had clients that, they don't understand what's going on, and they find out that their bank account's been frozen. And finding those things out will give you a better idea of where within the investigation your client is. That's really important, is to find out where within, the investigation, because these investigations can go on for quite some time, and there's many layers to federal investigations. Unlike state investigations, for the most part, they're faster. There's not as many people involved. There's not as many players, especially in Florida, where we're based out of. They don't use the grand jury that often, unless it's usually, especially in South Florida, unless it's murder cases or high-profile cases. Most of the time, the prosecutors will file charges by information in state court. So the federal system, uses the grand juries, a lot more than generally state courts, at least in South Florida. And even with, a package, right? You may get that notification from U.S. Postal Service that, hey, the package that you were expecting has been seized, with a phone number to call about your package. So there, you want to go deep. So once you've built that relationship with your client, and you've starting to build that trust, you need to know, right? Was this one phone call? Was it one voicemail? Was it going on for weeks? Did they ignore 3 letters, right, from the government? How long in between those contacts? Did they hear anything from friends, family members, people who may end up becoming co-conspirators? Is there chatter about something that they may or may not have done, right? You really need to go through and go in the nitty gritty with that. Now, we're going to go through to why, right? Okay, you want to know, right, why. And a lot of people will come in very guarded. They're going to kind of, again, it goes back to the trust. So you have to build that trust. You have to kind of get them comfortable, get them to be a little bit disarmed, really ask these questions, because deep down they know most of the time. They have a suspicion, they have a hunch. When that intervening event has occurred, all they do is they think about it, they obsess about it. That takes them to pick up the phone, to call you, to schedule an appointment to come into your office. So you're going to really need to go deep with the why. You want to know where, right? Where did this take place? We want to know the players. We want to get, the other people that they've, have dealt with. Is this another county? Is it another state, right? Where were the dealings done? Over the phone, text, or email? These are all different things, because you want to know. You may have a case where they might live in the Southern District of Florida, but that client is actually being investigated in one of the districts, the district courts in Tennessee for a crime, yet that client lives in Florida. So you need to get that information, because you as the attorney, you want to be the source of knowledge, and really that's going to steer what you do, what your actions are moving forward, right? Again, we want to know, when did the client first become aware? What documents do they have? Do they have anything, right? The financial crimes, there should be some documents. You're going to want to make sure that the client can provide you your documents. Your client is a major player in this as well, right? We've talked about the major players, and I didn't even talk about your client. Your client is going to be a great source of information. Again, not so much information at first. Well, I got called from the Fed, but as far as an information for you as the attorney to figure out the next steps to gain information, and come up with a game plan of what we're dealing with, because you don't want to walk into a phone call with a special agent or with an AUSA and not know anything. You might want to, depending on your strategy, not divulge a lot, and let them talk, but you don't want to know nothing. You want to come into that phone call, that initial contact with law enforcement, prepared. Okay, and obviously, did they speak already? What else has been going on with them throughout this case? Because the earlier you get involved, usually the better it is. But people tend to contact attorneys at all different parts of the investigation. We've pretty much seen it all. Now, question that we get quite often is, should you talk about sentencing exposure during the initial client interview? You know, I believe you should. You know, we believe you should, not from a position of scaring clients, that some attorneys do, scare them into hiring you, not from a position of weakness, either, because, when you're meeting your client, again, you have to build trust and confidence, but from a position of knowledge, right? You need to give your clients knowledge about what they're looking at and what the process is going to be like. This, for most clients in the federal system, they've never walked down this path before. But even if they have, maybe once, right, before, um, you are not just their fierce advocate, their fighter, their shield, but you're also the wise old sage who is their tour guide, right? You've walked these shoes 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 times before. So you can tell them where the potential issues are, the minefields, the things to be looking out for. And exposure is part of it. Based on federal guidelines and based on things you may have seen before. You never want to just come into a client meeting and go, yes, you're screwed, so I'm just going to, plea you out, and we're talking how much prison here. Even though we know that the federal, conviction rate is very high, over 95% of federal cases, don't go to trial, right? And they have a very high conviction rate, some kind of criminal sentence. But you want to be open and honest. You want to be upfront with the client. Again, it's about building that relationship and letting them know all of the things that go into your mind as far as how to successfully defend somebody accused, of a federal crime. So my personal recommendation is, we do it. I think it's very successful. We don't want to shy away from it, but we don't want to be doom and gloom either. So you have to be realistic. It's the same thing, I think, with any client in state court. You want to talk about minimum, maximum penalties. It's just, kind of the way we do it and what we believe in.